Monday, November 14th, 2022 meeting of the Cumberland Town Council. Our first order of business is a legislative sentiment, and I'm actually going to throw this right over to Councillor Story King.
All right. You want to start?
Or Mike. Councillor
it was-
Eads?
Well, it was, Mike and I both had the idea, but Mike
Yes.
pushed it forward a little faster. Go for it, Mike.
Well, tonight, we're absolutely honored to have the mayor of Sanibel Island, Florida, Holly Smith, on Zoom tonight. Holly actually graduated high school with Ronnie, and Shirley and I have been friends with her since we were little kids. And what kind of makes this special is not only is Holly a Cumberland native, she grew up right down in Wildwood. Her mom was the first woman selectman here in Cumberland. And I always say that Mary Lou, Holly's mom, set the bar. And I just think it's appropriate, Holly, that you're being here tonight and the fact that we have 3 women counselors on the council now. And I really think it's a big tribute to your mom that, where we are with the council and the quality of all the counselors we have. And we know you're really busy. You've had a lot on your plate. I think I was talking to you the week before, and you'd said, yeah, this job's too damn busy. And then the storm hit. I've had a chance to watch you, Holly, on numerous YouTube videos from your interviews with CNN and all the major channels. And it's especially nice when you're doing an interview and you got your state of Maine hat on. There it is. But I'm honored to call you my friend, and I think the people of Florida are so much better off that you are down there and with the reins of being the mayor. And Shirley would like to present you with something from our town council to you and your town council. And I'll let you take it away, Shirley.
Thank you. Like Mike said, I've known Holly most of her life. She's a little bit younger than I am, but we've spent hours together. She boarded her horse at our house when her mom and my dad were serving on the select board and then on the town council, and they spent hours in our kitchen just discussing local politics. And I just think she and I both learned a lot in our shared upbringing. So I'd like to read this sentiment. Holly, this is a Town of Cumberland resolution. It's an expression of sentiment of support for the city of Sanibel in Lee County, Florida. Whereas on September 28th, 2022, the city of Sanibel, Florida experienced near total devastation from Hurricane Ian, destroying the island community's access to the mainland and causing loss of life and billions of dollars worth of damage to homes and property. And whereas Mary Louise Smith was the first woman select person and elected to Cumberland's first town council. And whereas Holly Smith, her daughter, is currently mayor of Sanibel, and her roots and lessons on leadership come from her upbringing in Cumberland. And whereas the sentiment of the citizens of Cumberland are with all the citizens of Florida affected by this historical hurricane. Now therefore it be resolved by the town council of the town of Cumberland assembled on this 14th day of November 2022 that on behalf of our community to yours, we wish to extend our sincerest sympathies, warmest thoughts, and heartfelt prayers for a full and expedient recovery, and that you find a stronger, more resilient community on the other side of this tragedy.
Okay, you got.
I know, I wish I was there to give you a hug, Hall. We'll pop this in the mail.
I'm so humbled. This community is facing something that I hope very few around the world will have to face the way we are right now. But through that all, you learn even more what a community is, what you can do, what you will do, what you are doing. And every day we're seeing progress. We have a long way to go. And when I look at all you up at the dais right now, I have a sign on my back porch that I got at Skillins in Falmouth, and it says, "Remember your roots." And Cumberland is my roots. I think those who know me might not have ever thought that I would be mayor one day, and honestly, it was never a path. But you end up wherever you're supposed to be. And I will tell you, my mom, my family, my community of Cumberland was the best upbringing, the best place anybody could grow up. And our two communities are really similar in so many ways. And I remember when my mom was ill and I moved here and I said, "Mom, it's okay. I found my Cumberland." And I mean it. And I just, I want to thank you all for thinking of us. I'm humbled by the outpouring all around the country, all around the world, as we look to rebuild our community. So I just want to tell you one quick story. When I was made mayor in 2021, on that day in that year, it would have been my mom's 90th birthday. And to have that happen, for me to ascend to mayor, I knew that powers greater than me were watching and watching out. And I'm privileged to have the position. I'm privileged to be in front of all of you and know, Shirley, Mike, Ronnie, Ron, you were a part of who I am, and you helped me become me. And I think our friendships are, to reconnect this way is really special. So thank you all on behalf of all of our community, on behalf of our council. Thank you very much. And we're going to build back. We're going to be fine. It's going to take a while. There's going to be a process. There's going to be highs and lows. And we go through them every day. But, when you're a strong community, you can get through anything. You all know that as the town of Cumberland. And I know that as the city of Sanibel. So there's nothing we can't do if we believe in what we're doing. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Holly. It's so good to see you.
Holly, I'd like to just share a little story with you for just a second. You probably don't know who I am, but my name is Bob Vale, and your brother Gary was a classmate of mine at Greeley. We have shared paths, and he went to Maine Maritime before I did. We were the same age. I went in the service first, and then when I got out of the service, I went up to Maine Maritime Academy. But when you had applied back in those days, you had to have three, if I recall, you had to have three recommendations to go up there. So I chose my three people that I wanted to recommend me very carefully. And your father was wrote a letter of recommendation for me, and then Hattie Bickmore put me in the car and she drove me over to Cape Elizabeth to Ken Curtis's house and said, "I think we can cement it with this one here." And then my last one was I went up to Bob Andresen's, and you probably knew the Andresen family pretty well.
Sure.
A group of boys there, but having a recommendation from somebody in the state police didn't hurt either. But your mom and dad were just the greatest people. I knew them well. I knew them probably better than I knew you and Shelley and Gary and Mark. And they were top shelf people. They were tremendous contributors to this community, and their legacy will be carried forward. And I can see that you're following right along in their footsteps. So Godspeed and fair winds. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that story. It's kind of uncanny sometimes how people are connected when you just don't even know it. And you probably know that stoic picture of my dad, the sea captain. It's a side picture. When I came into my yard the first time, that picture was in my driveway in all of this muck, and it was scarred and scratched, but he made it through, and I'm having that picture just the way it was framed, and for that to be the first thing I saw when I came on my driveway, when I had 8 feet of water, and that's my dad was greeting me. Thank you for sharing that story. I really appreciate it, and I'll have to let Gary know that we chatted as well.
Ron, did you?
Thank you, Holly, for coming tonight. And
that one
Our
second.
best to you and your family.
Holly,
Thank you so much.
Holly, it's good to see you. It's been 42 years since I've seen you when we marched down the aisle when we graduated. You're just proof that good people come from Cumberland, and congratulations, and keep up the good work.
Thank you, Ron. It's great to see you, my
You
friend.
too.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening, knowing very much so that your plate is quite full. Do appreciate you joining us so that we could provide this sentiment and hear kind of your connection and all the awesome work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. I so appreciate being here. Thank you all. And you all take care of yourselves, and thank you for thinking of us, and we'll keep in touch.
Thanks,
You as
Holly.
well.
Good
Take
night.
care.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, so that's a hard one to follow.
Yeah. And now the approval of minutes. I do want to say thank you, Mike, for raising this and bringing this to, kind of offering it to the council to take this action. And Shirley, thank you for drafting that. So thank you both for making that happen on behalf of the council. The next order of business is in fact the approval of minutes, so for October 24th, 2022.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any comments or questions from the council?
I just have a comment that I'm going to vote to approve because the manager said, according to Robert's Rules of Order, we can approve even if we weren't here. And I was reading through the minutes and I was like, I was at that meeting. I know I was at that. I remember that. I remember the chief's speech. Well, I was in a hospital bed, but I was watching the town council meeting
Good
on
drugs.
YouTube, the YouTube channel. So that's why it felt like I had been here. So I'm going to vote to approve the minutes.
Thank you, and thank you for making sure everyone's clear on why. So all those in favor to approve the minutes? Thank you. Next is our manager's report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The first quick item I'd like to share with the audience here. Our own Chief Rumsey was appointed just recently the president of the Maine Chiefs of Police Association. So, Chief, thank you. Congratulations. And thanks for all that could attend as well. Many of us were there, and it was a pretty special night to see that. And as always, you did a great job and represented our town so well. Thank you, Chief. The next item we have is about another chief. Deputy Fire Chief Gerald Cross will be sworn in tonight. Chief Small, if you wouldn't mind taking it away, and Deputy Clerk Abby Lombard is here as well, so.
I want a few people to come up besides Gerald, so his wife, daughter Caitlin, and her husband Andrew, and their son, Alden. Got that right? Yes. Son Caleb and his parents, Honey and Lou, if they're here. No, they love the spotlight.
Is there anybody left in West Cumberland tonight?
I think these guys have got their cars running out front, just in case. I wanted all of them up here just because this is 4 generations of Cumberland. Like we were talking previously, these guys are no different. So a few quick words before he does get sworn in. He is getting promoted to the rank of deputy chief, and his predominant focus is going to be on training for fire and EMS. We've got others that will be helping him with that, but he'll be the one coordinating that. He'll have all the other supervisory skills that go along with it, but that's going to be his primary focus. A little bit about him. He joined the department in 1988 as one of our junior firefighters, and he graduated 3 years later in 1991. Since then, he is a state of Maine certified firefighter, a licensed EMT. He has served other ranks of lieutenant, captain, and again now as deputy chief. His full-time job is an operations manager at Risborough Brothers Construction, and he and his son Caleb also are running an excavation business, Cross Excavating. So full-time, part-time, and he's still finding a lot of time. He's probably one top 5 responders that we have in the call company. So he carries us. So there is, right now, there's 3 generations of the fire department, and the 4th maybe down the road. But Lou and his kids, Caitlin and Caleb. So it's really neat that we have that family atmosphere, as long as Ronnie put it, all of the West Cumberland. People, I'd say anybody from Central, raise your hand, but it'd be crickets. And the most important thing that Honey and Deb, our office manager, have got treats back at the fire station. So after this and him getting sworn in, this room will clear out because they're all going to go after their satisfying their sweet tooths. So it's all yours. It's all yours.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, please state your name,
I, Gerald Crows,
do swear
do swear
that I will support the constitutions
I will support the constitutions
of this state
of this state
and the United States,
and the United States,
so long as I continue a citizen thereof,
as long as I continue a citizen thereof.
that I will faithfully discharge,
I'll faithfully discharge,
to the best of my abilities,
to the best of my ability,
the duties incumbent on me
the duties incumbent on me
as Deputy Fire Chief
as Deputy Fire Chief
of the Cumberland Fire Department,
of the Cumberland Fire Department,
according to said constitutions,
according to said Constitution,
the laws of this state,
the laws of this state,
and the charter and ordinances of this town.
and the charter and ordinance of this town.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Glasses were a nice touch.
Congratulations, and
Yeah,
thank you for your
congratulations.
service.
Congratulations and thank you.
Congratulations, Carol.
Madam Chair.
Oh, go ahead, Ron.
I would just like to say something. I've been towing in this town for 40 years, and I used to have to race Gerald's dad to the turnpike to beat him to a call. Now I have to beat Gerald. And it's not an easy task, so.
So the next item tonight will be a legislative update from our senator, Senator Kathy Breen, who is here tonight. I've got to find it on the multitude of things we have on here. All right, so I kind of lost it, Brent. That one?
George Small, the guy followed his wife out. I knew his father.
So while people are leaving, I will say, for the folks at home,
Father
Our newly elected senator, Senator Teresa Peirce is here also. Teresa. The interesting thing about Representative Moriarty, Senator Peirce, and Senator Breen, they were all on the town councils as well. So they have been through many a nights like this, and I think it's kind of like old home day. Probably there's some of the things that all of you have missed from your time up in the legislature. So this is pretty special, and thank you for your patience tonight. The opportunity to meet with Mayor Smith was just something that came at the last minute that was really pulled together, and I think that was pretty special. So thank you for your patience tonight, and Senator Breen, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Manager Shane, and absolutely, I was so touched by that resolution and by the connection between Sanibel and Cumberland. That was a really beautiful tribute, and kudos to all of you, and certainly to her and her community. My name is Kathy Breen, and I've had the extraordinary privilege and honor of representing the town of Cumberland in the Maine State Senate for the last 8 years. And I wanted, as I'm finishing up, I've been what we've affectionately called the farewell tour, giving a legislative review of some of the things we did in the last year. This is probably because we weren't able to get on the schedule until this time of the year. Some of it you've probably already heard about through the media or through Maine Municipal or any other sort of media or news information outlets. But Representative Moriarty and I are going to just sort of take turns and give you some of the highlights of some of the things we accomplished this year. I do want to say as I go through it, as you know, I'm the Senate Chair of Appropriations, but Representative Peirce, now Senator-elect Peirce, was the House Chair, the co-chair on that committee with me for the last 2 years. Served on the committee before as a member for the session before, and as Bill said, she and I shared the gavel. Well, she was chair of the town council in Falmouth, I was chair of the town council. We overlapped for 3 years. Suffice it to say, we've had a lot of legislative therapy together over the years. And we'll probably do some more tonight. But so everything that you hear about tonight that was accomplished by the House and Senate certainly included Representative, now Senator-elect Peirce. So I think Bill said, oh, here's your mouse, like that's going to help. So let's see if that's going to.
Should click. Not clicking.
It's clicking, and it's making little boxes. Oh, do I do this?
There you go.
Thank you. All right. So just sort of straight up from the numbers point of view, as everybody knows, the COVID pandemic had economic effects on this country and on this state and on this town like none other. And the federal government responded in a way that it never had. And you might agree with it, you might disagree with it, but I did want to point out that it was an unprecedented economic crisis, and it was an unprecedented federal response. So in this past year, that took the form of the American Rescue Plan, and some of that money, $433,000 and change, went directly to the town of Cumberland. As you know, we reached 55% finally for state aid to education, and so to MSAD 51, we had about 1.8 million additional dollars than FY21. And then we also made it to full 5% revenue sharing after over a decade of not living up to our obligation. And so we were able to send a little bit more than $500,000 to the town in FY 2021. We did provide some very direct economic relief to people in Maine. We provided $850 checks to more than 800,000 eligible Maine working families. We provided property tax relief through the Property Tax Fairness Credit, which was a program that used to be called the Circuit Breaker Program, but is essentially the same program that folks apply to through filing an income tax return rather than coming to town hall. So it does have certain income requirements, but we expanded it, and the maximum benefit is $1,000 each for those under 65 and $1,500 for those over 65. And again, even if you don't have income that you would report on an income tax return, the way to get the property tax fairness credit or refund is through filing the income tax. One of the things that the federal government did, and we went along with it, is we expanded the earned income tax credit on a temporary basis in FY21, and this past year we made that permanent so that 100,000 additional Maine families will get help with the rising costs of electricity, gas, childcare through an income tax credit. We also adjusted upward the cost of living adjustment for retired state workers. Some of you may recall in 2012 there was a large income tax reduction that was funded in part through reducing retiree benefits for state workers. We were not able to completely restore that, but we put $110 million into that system. That's for state workers and retired teachers as well. We also did an across-the-board income tax reduction for retirees in Maine so that everybody will have, over the next 3 years, an income tax pension deduction up to $25,000. We did a lot of innovative things with education this year. In particular, for the first time, we created the Education Rainy Day Fund, since we were able finally to get to 55%. And of course, we had a surplus. We wanted to guard against any potential revenue shortfall, so we put about $15 million aside for the Education Rainy Day Fund. We funded a lot of new capital improvements in career and technical education. Many of those programs around the state were using equipment that was decades old and were in dire need of new technology and new equipment. We funded Jobs for Maine's graduates. That program has been around for a long time. It focuses on middle and high school students who are first generation kids to go on to post-secondary education. And it actually allows them to earn college credit during their high school years at no cost. You may have heard about extending our free universal school meals. This was a pandemic program that the federal government put in place during the pandemic, and it became very, very clear to legislators all around Maine when we saw school buses being deployed all over the state to make sure that kids were getting the meals that they needed and had come to expect from the schools. And so we decided we were one of 2 states in the country to extend free universal school meals so that all kids who go to school have access to free breakfast and free lunch regardless of their income. And we are funding that with 100% state dollars. And we're providing 2 years of free community college to the high school kids who were affected most by the pandemic. I think it's going to be a really interesting experiment, sort of a pilot program, and see what kind of bump in enrollment and what kind of impact those kids have with those credentials moving into the workforce. We were able to keep in-state tuition at the UMaine system flat again. And we expanded the Opportunity Maine tax credit. That's a tax credit you might be familiar with, where if you decide to live and work in Maine and you apply again through your income tax return, you can get up to $2,500 a year reduced to offset student loan payments. up to $25,000 lifetime benefit. This is a program that started exclusively for graduates of Maine institutions, but over the last few years, we've expanded it so that no matter where you go to college, no matter what kind of degree you get, if you come to Maine, we will help you with your student loans. And I think Representative Moriarty is going to talk about these next two slides.
Thank you, Kathy. Good evening, members of the council. I'm Steve Moriarty, 12 Oak Street here in Cumberland, your current state representative. And Kathy, you and I have appeared together here in this room before this body a number of times in recent years, and I want to assure everybody that her service to the town has been extraordinary, and
You're
You will
happy
be missed.
clicking, Steve.
oops.
There you go.
Perfect.
Then maybe click
Click on
slide
this.
forward.
Couple slides.
Oops, sorry.
There we go.
There we go. This thing. Yeah.
Okay. All right, so we now have the technology straightened out, at least for the moment. We wanted to, Kathy and I felt it was important for you to have an opportunity to meet her successor, Teresa Peirce, who within about 3 weeks will become our newest senator. And I expect, Teresa, that you and I will be back before this group in this room from time to time to brief individuals on what's going on in the legislature. So we've been adjourned for over 6 months now. Much of this information may, as Bill suggested, may already be familiar to you. But the topic that I'm about to cover, although it, again, it's a bill that was passed over 6 months ago, it's just now beginning to have its impact felt. And we now have something more to tell you about in that the Maine State Revenue Service has issued 2 guidance documents, one for applicants and one for cities and towns, which has helped to give some greater, it's helped to put some flesh on the bone, so to speak. And until recently, we would not have had that available to us, and there would have been perhaps more unanswered questions than there will be tonight. So anyway, tax stabilization means freezing property taxes at the current level. But it doesn't apply across the board. First of all, a resident must apply for stabilization by December 1st each year. So there's still some time for those who would otherwise qualify to get the application in. The assessor then has the authority to determine whether or not the application should be approved. It applies to residents who have who are 65 years of age or older and who have maintained a homestead in Maine for at least 10 years. Also, the applicant must be eligible for a homestead exemption. Curiously enough, they don't have to actually be taking the exemption. They merely have to be eligible in order to qualify for tax stabilization. And basically what happens is if your property taxes are stabilized, they are frozen at the current level for as long, indefinitely, for as long as the property owner continues to meet, to qualify and to meet the standards that apply. And they won't be increased until there's a sale of the property or some other disposition along the way. And according to the Maine State Revenue Service, each town and city in the state will be reimbursed in full by the state for the resulting loss of tax revenue as the assessed value increases inevitably upward, but is frozen at a lower level below. The gap will grow wider and the revenue loss will grow for the town, but for the fact that the state will reimburse the town for that difference. So that's an important, very, very important thing to know. We're starting to see a few friction points, and you've probably heard of them directly. One is that under the law, the property must be owned by the applicant. Now, the Maine Revenue Service is taking a very strict interpretation of that term. And as far as they're concerned, ownership requires that the applicant's name appear on the deed to the property in question. In most cases, in joint tenancy, it's the name of the husband and the wife. But there are cases in which those who are married and who are spouses have, for a number of reasons, decided to convey title to just one of the two. And so that the deed may reflect merely the husband's name or the wife's name or what have you. That's going to, there are a number of cases have surfaced in which there have been these intraspousal transfers of title. And as long as they remain living and married, it doesn't affect anything. They still qualify for stabilization. A problem can occur and has occurred when one of the spouses passes away, and it's then the memories of what happened in the past come back in, and that is that the title was transferred to just one previously. And so what happens in that situation? Well, if the title's been transferred to one spouse, and the first spouse to pass away is the spouse whose name does not appear on the deed, there is no property taxable consequence to the surviving spouse. That's pretty easy and straightforward. But if, on the other hand, the first of the two spouses to pass is that spouse who is the owner by deed, the surviving spouse is not entitled to stabilization immediately upon the passing. Instead, the surviving spouse has to maintain continued permanent residence in Maine for 10 more years until he or she, before he or she can qualify for stabilization. And depending upon one's age at the time of the occurrence of all these events, that can really present a problem and can, in effect, deny the surviving spouse the benefit of the stabilization program. And I agree, that is a serious shortcoming in the statute. On Thursday this week, I'm going to file a bill up in Augusta, which hopefully will have the effect of modifying the definition of ownership so that it can apply in two cases. Number one, where someone's name appears on a deed, that's self-explanatory, but also if a spouse's name is not on the deed, it would apply to, that spouse would be considered to be an owner if he or she has been married to the deceased spouse for 10 years or more and otherwise fulfilled all the other requirements of the statute. So that in that situation, where the first spouse to pass is the spouse whose name is on the deed, the surviving spouse would qualify for stabilization from that point forward without having to wait 10 years. One of the interesting features of the guidance that has been published by the Maine Revenue Service comes in the form of kind of a clarification, because the statute itself is silent on this point, and that is that when the statute refers to 10 years of permanent residency, it's not 10 consecutive years. If in your career you have lived in and out of Maine, as your career has taken you down south, out west, or whatever, and you've come back and forth, all of the periods of time in which you have lived in Maine and maintained a permanent residence can be combined or stacked together so that the 10-year period can be achieved by non-consecutive periods of permanent residency in Maine. Now, there may have to be, in my discussions with others, there may have to be some proof of how long you lived in Maine and where you lived. It doesn't have to be the same town, probably would not be the same town, but the periods of time in each town in which you've lived in Maine can be combined together to achieve that 10-year required minimum. which I think is probably, which is a good thing. Another problematic area is the fact that the statute requires that a homeowner must apply each year before December 1st in order to get the benefits of stabilization, which raises the question of what happens if, by virtue of carelessness or forgetting or whatever, a reapplication is not made. What happens then? The Revenue Service has, in its guidance, said that if you do not reapply on schedule, your property taxes automatically bump up to the level at which they would have been otherwise without stabilization. Now, you can then reapply on time, but at that point, you'd be stabilized at the higher level, losing permanently the benefit that you would have enjoyed in the intervening years. There are going to be a number of bills filed which will fine-tune and sort of thresh out some of the idiosyncrasies of this statute, and I suspect that's probably going to be one of them. Also, as we know, there are folks who live here in town for less than 6 months of the year and reestablish permanent residence elsewhere, typically down south, get a new driver's license, register to vote elsewhere, and so forth. If that happens, you lose stabilization for the property that you continue to own here in Maine, because you're no longer a permanent residence. So there's going to have to be a lot of work with your accountant if you're at a point in life in which you're interested in leaving the state seasonally because of perceived or real tax benefits elsewhere, and the weighing of those benefits against the consequence up here by losing stabilization on the property that you continue to own. And I have not advanced these slides. Oops, I should have didn't have to advance it. Well, anyway, I wasn't hitting the button on schedule. I was going by my paper notes. So anyway, that's stabilization as it stands right now. Again, I've spoken with a lot of people. It's anticipated there's going to be a lot of fine-tuning, a lot of new legislation to work this thing out in the upcoming session. And you may have some questions tonight, so I'm happy to answer any questions that come to mind or have been raised with you by residents.
When the Maine Revenue Service said that they were going to reimburse Maine communities, was that at 100%?
That's, I'm glad you asked that question and that I didn't raise it, because it's an issue that's troubling me. And I'll be frank with you. The statute says that the state may reimburse the towns and cities at a 100% rate. May doesn't mean must or shall or will. The intent behind the legislation was to require the state to reimburse, but the law doesn't say that. Notwithstanding that, the Maine Revenue Service has said that the state will reimburse at a full rate. So we have some tension between the language of the statute and the interpretation by Maine Revenue. I can't tell you how that's going to work itself out.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair.
Oh, go ahead.
Thank you, Representative Moriarty, and first off, congrats on your recent reelection as well.
Thank you, Mark.
So I have the honor of serving on the Legislative Policy Committee for MMA, and we've had 2 meetings now, and we've basically started with gathering every potential topic that anyone in any town in Maine wants to focus on as part of this legislative session. That's now been whittled down to what we're kind of calling the top 10, just based on priority of responses. Number 1 on that list is LD 290. And there are voices that ranging from it's perfect, leave it as is, those are very rare, I will say, to let's repeal it completely, to maybe a way to introduce some type of bill might be an overlay to the homestead exemption with means testing of some sort, to potentially bolstering other state legislative priorities and statutes that allow municipalities to create their own programs. Have you heard folks raising this issue of means testing? I mean, to Councilor Story King's question, if there are concerns about long-term potential funding of this, have you heard folks raising that issue in terms of
Absolutely.
potential fixes?
Absolutely. Within weeks of our adjournment back in April, those kind of questions, that question among others, was raised and was sort of in circulation among legislators. And it hasn't gone away. It's a real issue.
Okay.
Because we have to face the fact that, I mean, by analogy, I think the state was required to reimburse towns and cities for education at the 55% rate dating back to 2004. Until last year, or the current year, it never did.
Hmm.
And it was also supposed to give towns and cities 5% of sales and income tax revenue as revenue sharing. But until this past year, it didn't do it. Could the same thing happen with stabilization? If the state, for whatever reason, just doesn't have the ability to pay that much back, I would have to say it can happen because it has happened.
I just want to add, one can hope the 55% for education was a ballot initiative, wasn't it not?
It was.
And this is a legislative initiative, so hopefully the legislature and its appropriations people will be in sync moving forward, that it won't be such a huge discrepancy for our communities.
All of this, of course, begs the question as to where the state will get its revenue with which to reimburse all of our communities in full as the years go by and as property appreciation continues to grow and we have revals and that sort of thing, and that's an unanswered question. Okay, thanks very much. I'll turn it back to Kathy.
Thank you, Steve. This is one of the moments where you're really glad you have an attorney as your state representative. Steve has a way of analyzing things that is very helpful to all of us. So moving on to another big topic you've probably heard a lot about is PFAS. And I'll say in general terms that Maine is really on the front or the leading edge of PFAS discovery, trying to figure out what it means for property owners, trying to figure out the science of what is a safe and acceptable level of PFAS in either soil or water. And to be quite transparent, there's a lot of unanswered questions still about PFAS. In my mind, we are at the beginning of the process. I think eventually it will be like lead or asbestos or tobacco or what have you, where the Attorney General of Maine has already filed a suit against the manufacturers of PFAS. But at the moment, we created, between last year and the year before, a $100 million fund to acknowledge folks whose soil has been tested for unacceptably high levels of PFAS. And we're doing that to try to help property owners who make a living off their land to relocate and get reimbursed for the cost either of remediation or removal or relocation. Again, given that I do see class action lawsuits lining up for this, I also see most likely a settlement agreement like we've seen with other manufacturers. I was very careful when we were doing this to make sure we put the words in that when we do get settlement funds, that those settlement funds go back to the taxpayers of Maine and go back into the general fund, because I don't think the taxpayers of Maine should be footing the bill for this. So that's a note to my successors to keep your eye on that in the future. A couple other things we did with environmental impacts. You might know that for many years, Juniper Ridge landfill in Old Town was waste from out of state, in particular construction waste. We have put an end to that. And we've also set up some resources to help folks like folks in Cumberland who are going to be facing sea level rise to get some help dealing with flood insurance and other sort of technical issues with sea level rise that is already here and coming even more. We also made some really important investments in social services and healthcare. We invested $250,000 in Meals on Wheels. We boosted in-home and community support services for older Mainers. We're trying to do much more with getting folks services in their homes so that they can stay at home and reduce costs of moving into a higher level of care. We did invest in long-term care facilities. We funded Maine hospitals, and we established a hospital loan fund for some of the more rural hospitals that are really struggling to keep their doors open. And you would never guess it by the numbers of EMS people who are just in this room, but I know that Cumberland and other towns are really struggling to staff public safety positions with volunteers and professionals. It's much worse, actually, in other counties in Maine than in Cumberland County. So we created a commission to try to look at the long-term viability of the current models and try to address those labor shortcomings. We also strengthened healthcare for new mothers. Maine was the only state in New England where we only provided 90 days of postpartum care for people on Maine Care. We were an outlier in New England, and this was having poor effects on outcomes for infants. And so we are now in line with the rest of New England and in line with the professional recommendations of the providers that anyone on Maine Care now over the next couple years will be covered for 12 months of postpartum care. We strengthened fertility care coverage, something that Maine actually was lagging on also. We improved healthcare coverage for Maine kids. That's the federally funded children's health insurance program. And we added, with state dollars, we added 40,000 additional kids to receive care. This next bill, this next issue, testing for cytomegalovirus, that's a mouthful, CMV, but it's a little known but very preventable virus, and a new law ensures Maine kids can be screened and treated. And when kids are screened for this, the major problem that results from untreated CMV is hearing loss. And the Baxter School predicts that about half of the kids who enroll in Baxter School services for kids who are hard of hearing contract it through this virus. And this particular bill I worked on with the Sweet family in Cumberland. I don't know if you know Laura Sweet and her family, but they have a daughter who was born with CMV. She has cochlear implants. She's about 9. Her name is Jane. She's absolutely amazing. She has an older brother. But this Laura Sweet actually came to me with this idea for screening and early intervention 6 years ago. I introduced this bill. And she was actually the parent on the working group that was developing the work. And of course, as you can imagine, with a public health thing like this, COVID sidelined it for a couple of years. But now that COVID has passed, Maine CDC got right on board, and there's still some things to be worked out, like for kids who aren't born in hospitals for home births and things like that. But I just want to give a shout out to Laura Sweet and her family, because this bill never would have happened without the Sweet family, so that was pretty amazing. We also returned the benefit for oral health in Maine Care, and we're also looking at trying to lower healthcare costs by studying barriers. You know, we still, especially people who live in northern Maine, are still so incredibly frustrated that their Canadian family members and neighbors are getting so much better deals on medications and healthcare. So we continue to try to chip away at that, including the prescription drug stuff. We improved contraceptive coverage. so that no healthcare, state-regulated healthcare plan in Maine can do anything but cover all prescription contraceptive medications approved by the FDA. We have done a lot to increase access to insulin. In particular, you can now, if you have an insulin prescription and you're running out, you can go to a pharmacy and they can refill 30 days automatically. This particular issue of insulin is really very difficult for the kids who are coming out of coverage from their parents' insurance plan, and they might be changing jobs, they might be living out of state or coming here from a different state. And so it's a lot of those young adults who are dependent on insulin who are really in a very precarious position. So they now can get a 30-day supply with their prescription just through their pharmacist. We continue to clamp down on double billing practices, and we're also, again, continuing to study long-term solutions for prescription drug reform. Of course, we do run into interstate commerce issues with that, so it's a challenge, but we continue to work on at least having it more transparent and trying to find solutions for the drugs most commonly used in Maine, the most common sort of frontline medications. We did a lot for the workforce. We're trying to do better on affordable housing. We have a long way to go. There's a lot of things here we've done for Maine children and families, but I'm long-winded, so I want to get to the Rainy Day Fund. In particular, I want to point out that even though Maine benefited from the American Rescue Plan Act and that huge infusion of money, the legislature, the governor, the Appropriations Committee, all of us treated that for what it was, which is a one-time infusion for the purposes of getting through a crisis and through real rebuilding from that crisis. So we invested it in things like, helping small businesses, workforce development, helping all sorts of, public health initiatives, all that sort of stuff. We did not fund any of the things I'm talking about with that money. We did not take one-time money and try to plow it into our annual budget. That would have been a huge mistake. Nobody would do that with their personal budget. If you had a windfall of money, you would not, go get involved in something that's going to need money year after year. And we did not do that with ARPA money. We were very, very careful not to do that. The Rainy Day Fund, this is something that comes out of the money that we can't spend because we adjourn in April, and then there's money that comes into the state through the end of the fiscal year through June 30th. So that couple of months of revenue got plowed almost entirely into the Rainy Day Fund. We did direct some of it to roads and bridges, but this is why you see the Rainy Day Fund at historic highs. It's almost up to $1 billion. And I'm pleased to say Representative Peirce's bill to make sure ballots were secure was passed and funded so that we now have a very strict chain of custody for all of the ballots in Maine to make sure that the Secretary of State's office controls the whereabouts of the ballots all the time, indefinitely. We're going to have open primaries in 2024. So at the moment, when you are an unenrolled voter, I'm pausing for a minute. Was this something you wanted to talk about, Steve? No? Okay. Next, I'll turn it over to you afterwards. I'm sorry, I forgot for a minute. Right now, if you are an unenrolled voter, you cannot vote in a primary. As of 2024, if you're an unenrolled voter, you can walk into a primary election and you can pick a Democratic ballot or a Republican ballot and vote for the candidates on that party primary ballot. You don't, right now, if you want to do that, you have to temporarily register. You have to register as a Democrat or a Republican. And then if you want to unenroll, you do that later. In 2024, you don't have to do any of that. If you're unenrolled, you walk in, you can pick a ballot and vote and go home. So, We also added 5 new positions to the Secretary of State's office. As you probably know, there's a big retirement trend going on with town clerks across Maine. So the Secretary of State's office, the Elections Bureau, is doing a lot of work to do outreach and training for town clerks across the state. And we now have a process for citizens to report any concerns about elections and securities. And we now have positions that will do spot audits, like quality control audits throughout the state on an ongoing basis. And then in 2024, we'll have our first statewide election audit. You think we're done? Okay. We did a lot of energy relief, and that's it. So are there questions for me or for Steve?
Let me just say that I just took a look at the clock at the back of the wall. You're already an hour into your meeting.
Sorry.
And have a lot of other things to do. So I think you have the slides.
Yeah.
So that being the case, I think it's best that Kathy and I say goodnight and go about your business unless there's something you really wanted to.
Kathy, I just wanted to say thank you for,
Oh,
you know, being elected is not, you donate a lot of you put in a lot of your personal time. You take away from a lot of family time, and you've done a spectacular job, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
I mean, thank you, Mike, and thank you, Steve. Thank you, Bill, everybody. It's been an extraordinary, as I said, extraordinary privilege to represent Cumberland. Working with Mike Timmons, working with Dale Deno, working with Steve Moriarty, and Bill, of course, is always knows how to reach me. And I just want to thank you all. It's been really extraordinary privilege, and I'm really, really excited that I'm being succeeded by Teresa Peirce. Her record is almost identical to mine in terms of her voting. Her commitment to public service is extraordinary. She's already done 8 years in the House, so she enters the Senate with a huge body of knowledge and expertise, and you all are going to benefit from her work with Steve as well. So thank you all. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Moving to public discussion. Public discussion is for comments on items that are not on the agenda. Comments are limited to 5 minutes per person. Rebuttal comments will be limited to 2 minutes. Public discussion topics may be brought up again under new business for further council discussion. Is there anyone who would like to come up and comment on a non-agenda item? All right. Moving to legislation and policy. Item 22-140, to hold a public hearing to consider an act on authorizing the town manager to execute closing documents for the purchase of the Valhalla Banquet Center from Maine State Golf Association, Inc., for a purchase price of $325,000 to be paid from the Building Reserve Fund. Mr. Manager, anything you want to?
Just a couple of quick things. In 1995, the banquet center was built. Before there was an older building that got torn down, and everything got hauled away. Even a new foundation was poured for the banquet center. Then, fast forward to October of 2011, the Maine State Golf Association bought the banquet center along with 15 or 16 parking spaces to basically become what was going to be the Maine Golf Hall of Fame and bring all the umbrella organizations under the MSGA to Valhalla. They had superintendents organizations, they had women's golf, men's golf, all kinds of seniors golf. That was supposed to be bringing all those groups to Valhalla under one umbrella. That never proved to happen or actually play out. And then COVID struck and everybody was working from home, and the MSGA realized that they probably could just work at home and didn't really need a office or a actual physical space. So 2 years ago, they they listed the banquet center for around $700,000 and had 2 potential buyers that eventually fell through over time. Then most recently, they approached Assistant Manager Christopher Bolduc and asked if the town would be interested in purchasing. And We went back and forth, and finally, I brought a price to you of approximately $325,000, and that number was agreed upon by the MSGA. So we are here tonight to ask your approval for that purchase. Right now, we have nothing specific planned, obviously. I will share with you, we are probably not going to be back in the banquet business. The days of weddings and outside events just basically did more wear and tear to the building than actually paid for anything, and it just put us into the hole much deeper at the time. But we do have other things. We have evolved into an aging in place program. Devin Galvin, who will be here next month to talk to you about the things that she's doing with the seniors. She was up at Drown Road last Friday and basically did some games up there with some of the residents, and that was very well received. We're looking to try to do a structured senior program down there in the mornings when the business is really not, the building would not be used very often. Our recreation program has an enormous need for additional spaces that'll be looked at. And this building in particular, as we grow as a community, we're going to need to add staff, and eliminating a potential multi-million-dollar addition to this building, instead moving potentially the entire rec department down to Valhalla and doing all our recreation right at Valhalla is something that could work, as well as hosting daytime events there because of the offices that the MSGA built while they were there. So there's a lot of positive things that could happen. We have nothing, in concrete yet, but obviously we will be developing building use policies over the next few months to bring to you. But we're excited about the opportunity to have this space. It's over 4,000 square feet of space that we used to host many community events, many events between our neighbors were held there, and it'd be nice to have a place that we could do that once again as well.
Any initial questions or comments from the council? Go ahead, Mark.
Thank you. Just one question for you, Mr. Manager. Can you remind me, in 2011, when we sold the building to MSGA, what that sales price was approximately?
$515,000.
$515,000. Okay, great. I was just doing some math, trying to figure out what that would be in today's money, and it's pretty significant. It's close to $675,000. So it's great.
Good, Tig?
Bill, you mentioned a little bit of wear and tear. Just out of curiosity, my understanding is that any improvements are kind of largely cosmetic, right, in nature? We're not.
That is correct.
Okay, thanks.
It's got to be the only building in Cumberland that is selling for less than it last sold for.
Right.
This is a public hearing. Are there any questions or comments from the public? All right,
A motion, if you're looking for one.
please do.
I move to authorize the town manager to execute closing documents for the purchase of Valhalla Banquet Center from Maine State Golf Association, Inc., for a purchase price of $325,000 to be paid from the Building Reserve Fund per the council order included in the meeting materials.
Second.
Any questions or comments from the council?
One of the folks on the Housing Task Force approached me with a comment and a question about the use of this building moving forward, and I said that I would bring it up. So the question was raised whether there would be opportunity for workforce housing for use in that building. So as we consider future uses for that, I would ask that we at least look at that as a housing source and either dismiss it or move forward, but at least consider it. So anyways, I think this is a good move. I'm certainly behind this purchase.
Can I address that? There might be some deed restrictions on that having to do with the building's use as a recreational facility. Just saying.
Just saying.
I think that might have come with the purchase of the golf course piece of it. 9 Holes was bought with a federal grant as our first piece of open space in the town of Cumberland. I don't think it applied to the clubhouse portion. And you recall, we kind of we took a half acre of that and made it a 0 setback
But when
line.
we sold it to the Maine State Golf Association,
There was
there was
something
a
in there?
stipulation that they couldn't sell it to just anybody when they
Right.
were ready to sell.
Well, we
had
had
to
right
be
of
a-
first
In
refusal,
the recreational industry.
and it would have to meet what the underlying zone was, and we did create an overlay zone for Valhalla as well, so
Right.
we could check into that.
I do not like being the institutional memory.
I do have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Thank you. 22-141, to consider an act on authorizing the town manager to execute a lease agreement for a new radio communication tower on town-owned land for future public safety equipment. So, go ahead, you go. Nope.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This agreement in your packet tonight is to basically come into an agreement to build a radio tower that Chief Rumsey has been working with a vendor to construct on Rangeway off Middle Road. We needed a overlay zone for a public communications tower. We have a vendor who is willing to work with us. They are willing to construct the tower, build include a $22,000 plus lease payment to us for the continued use of that. We would have approval of the site plan and location of the tower. We would also require planning board approval of the tower. So it would go through all the regular procedures that any other tower would go through, and through our telecommunications ordinance. Chief Rumsey was very successful in getting a communications study put together. Chief, you have anything to add to that tonight, or are you going to save that for your CIP?
Yeah.
Okay. You'll be getting into more of the details related to that in the CIP presentation, but tonight we're looking for authorization. We're still working out some of the finer details of the lease agreement to make sure it falls in line with what we developed and approved as an overlay ordinance.
And I guess maybe just for the public, as a reminder, that we recently changed kind of zoning and ordinances that made this kind of specific in that the towers could be erected and leased, but that there had to be space for public safety. It was really specific in what we were intending to kind of support the needs of the town in our EMS communication. At the same time, benefits to citizens and whatnot with potentially better cell service in certain areas. But this was really kind of a key need that we were looking to address at the same time. I will note, and I apologize, I didn't make note of this on the last item of business as well, but our Lands and Conservation Commission did discuss both the last item and this item as well in their kind of in accordance to their charter, and at their last meeting, they did put forward their approval and recommendation to move forward with this lease, understanding the public safety concerns. I don't know, Tig and Mark, if there would be anything, or Mr. Schwint, I know you're here as well from the meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. So we discussed, I mean, I think when it comes down to the public safety element, that was really kind of the chief concern. We looked at the land into which the towers would be placed. There weren't kind of massive concerns there. I'd also mention that CCLT was there to discuss as well, and there weren't, any kind of concerns flagged from that end as well. And just backtracking to Valhalla, yeah, absolutely what you said, they were supportive of kind of that larger purchase. So, yeah. I don't know, Mike, if you want to add anything, but.
And keeping the rest of the property open, that was key, because that land on Rangeway especially goes all the way back to the Falmouth Town line. So it's 1,700 or 1,800 feet, that
Spaghetti lot.
property line. Very spaghetti lots, but they're deep, so.
When you get down to the documents finally for this, you might want to remove the state of Illinois, County of Cook at the end.
Okay.
I was just reading through, trying to double check the
Hence the red line
responsibility
version.
for removing
Yes.
The equipment, and that is in there. That's always a concern with these large pieces of technology, that the responsibility for removing them befalls on someone besides us.
I guess similarly, one question I had, and not being a lawyer, was that we do give the subleasing. I just didn't know if there were any concerns allowing subleasing, consider, like, if everything would follow accordingly.
Well, that,
way it read.
that obviously is a revenue source for the folks that are constructing the tower. We would be looking at the potential interference with our radio system for any additional radio additions, and those are some of the elements that our town attorney is still working through the final details on that, because we need to honestly have some power to say yay or nay in that, because honestly, right now, up on the FAA tower, that's one of the issues we're having. We're running into interference between our radio systems and North Yarmouth's, so.
Okay.
I would imagine there are FCC rules as well as FAA rules that have to be considered.
Yep.
Way above our pay grade.
Yeah. I guess that was like, right now, at least the document in our packet, everything was like without the necessity of obtaining any landlord consent or whatever, so I guess that was,
Our attorneys are still working
Perfect.
on those details as
Okay.
well. Some of the stuff is just the way they do business, and other things are more specific to our location on the towers.
yeah. It's one of those where like, in standard practice, I'm sure that's no big deal, but knowing what our intent was. Those are go ahead, Ron.
Madam Chair, one question for the manager. Snow removal, is that us or is that on their dime?
We'll be removing snow up to the gates and to the towers like we do today. Range Way, as it continues to Harris Road, is still our property.
That's,
So we'll be going up there, and we've got to turn around, so we'll be plowing in to turn around and coming
Okay.
back out.
It's generally a smaller truck, Ron, that I notice going up
It
there.
is.
yeah.
So I just wanted to address I think the County of Cook reference, we should still look into that, obviously, and scrub that. But I do think that section in the signature portion of this agreement relates to the notary certification for the tenant, meaning US Cellular located off of Bryn Mawr in Cook County. So in other words, when they're signing this document, they will need to go before a notary public in the state of Illinois and the County of Cook. And as a result, I think that's why they reference Cook County there, but obviously we can have our attorneys scrub it, but I think it strikes me as being appropriate, but we can look into it.
And that's why we have an attorney on our.
I'm also a notary public in Cook County, I think, so,
So if you need to get married.
yeah.
I'll make a motion.
Oh, it is a public hearing. Are there any questions or comments from the public?
Mine is simple. I can't position in my mind where this tower is in reference to the other one, and why wouldn't we put it basically on the same site as the other tower is to conserve property and space down there?
The location, that's the first place the current vendor looked. That tower is full. And under the current ordinance, the fall distances of those towers would be restricted on that site. So I don't think they could fit a second tower on that site, nor I don't believe the existing cell company would allow the second tower on the site. So as you know, with the fall distance requirements in our ordinance, it's got to be a pretty big clear zone. And that's a 200-foot tower, just like the one that's there today.
Understood. I'm used to being in the service and looking on farms of towers, so you can put them pretty close to each other because they take basically the same fall distance.
This tower has a different fall
It does. It's smaller.
engineer, yeah, and
It's an
it's more,
engineered system not to
yeah.
fall as far as the other
more
one.
implodes than falls over or something.
Falls in on
Yeah,
itself.
falls in.
I will entertain a motion.
Okay. I move to authorize the town manager to execute a lease agreement for a new radio communication tower on town-owned land for future public safety equipment.
Second.
Any more questions or comments from the council? All those in favor? Thank you. The next two items, I know we highlighted these in the crier this week because I do want to call out the fact that this was happening every year as part of our budgetary, kind of pre-budgetary process. But our town manager really brought it as an idea to say we should bring this really to the public forefront, that this is happening. This is kind of the basis for which we then start building our budget process, which really doesn't kick off until February. And so I do thank the chief, both our chiefs, for being here tonight and kind of kicking this off. So kind of our departments that have kind of larger long-term investment needs will be coming in front of the council in a kind of publicly on the record to really walk us through what are their big items. And so I will open it up for 22-142 to hear a report from our police chief regarding police department capital improvement plan review. So thank you for being here, Chief Rumsey.
Thank you for having me, Councilor. So this first request is a joint request between the police department and the fire department, and as Bill mentioned, this has been a long-term project that we've been working on, so thank you very much for the vote that you just took. That's very exciting to see some of the work that we've done coming to fruition. And just in case during this presentation you have a tower question that I can't answer or a radio question that I can't answer, I'm pleased to let you know that James McNichol, who's a representative of the company that's going to build the tower, is here with us. So he's potentially here to help out if I get lost. You know, if I need a lifeline, I might be able to pull him and help me out.
Your phone a friend.
Right. So I think we've been here before you, or most of you, and talked about this radio project before. So you might have heard the story, but I'll tell it anyway because I think it's really important that when I very first came to Cumberland, and I think I may not have even started yet, I had been selected for the job and was coming around to meet some of the officers at the police department, take a ride around town and kind of get the lay of the land. And a few of the PD staff that I met first day basically shook my hand and said, "Hey, welcome. When can you fix our radios?" So the issue of good quality radio communication between our public safety personnel and their dispatch has been a long-term challenge. And it kind of came to a head right after I got here when the construction was getting underway on the renovation of the fire department, and the developers realized that the radio antennas that were positioned on top of the fire department couldn't stay there. So we scrambled to find a new home for them. They ended up on the FAA tower, and it was kind of a continuation of what I think has been over the years sort of a succession of Band-Aids that have been put on our radio system to try to keep them going, make marginal improvements from time to time. So this request that you have before you, and I think you got in your packet the actual Word document of the request, and these few slides, just for talking points that we'll discuss tonight, I think are to sort of highlight the importance of the request, which I think I can speak for Chief Small and I and say that this is of paramount importance to us because we really believe that there is a serious impact to the safety of our first responders, and there's actually a pretty serious impact, I think, to the folks that we serve out in the community, and those two things for us make this priority number one. So we started working with the Communications Design Consulting Group in July of 2021, and they issued a report to us indicating that our inability to talk with each other in dispatch negatively impacts service delivery and first responder safety. Components of the radio system that we have now are at end of life. That means the components are old and they're actually no longer being supported by the manufacturer. So manufacturers not making replacement parts, manufacturers discontinuing tech support at some point in time, and we're going to come to a point very soon regardless that the system starts to fail us because we can't fix it as is. And we discovered during the process of the study that the FAA tower where our radio equipment is located is causing some sort of interference, and probably our equipment needs to get moved off of there. You may have seen some of these reports, and I'm going to provide you with a link to go and do all the reading that you want to do or that you might care to do at the end of this presentation. But this little map that you see, Cumberland is located right in the center of it. And the map is called TalkBack. So if one of our officers is out on the road using their portable radio and they're talking to dispatch, according to the computer modeling that our engineer did, this map would tell you that wherever you see white, we are able to talk to dispatch from our portables from inside residential buildings. Wherever you see green, we're able to talk to dispatch while standing out in the open in the street, maybe not inside of a residence. And wherever you see gray, there's no coverage. So you're talking about here, you're talking about up in here, and then this long stretch down, I think that's Middle Road. What I can tell you anecdotally from our folks that work the street is that these maps are actually pretty optimistic. There's actually greater issues than are shown on this map. And as an example, I think this is Route 100 right here, and right here in Route 100, just south of the West Fire Station, this is a huge dead zone for our radios. And I actually, I have a little clip of some radio traffic from just north of here that I'm going to play for you in a minute. But we've had a bunch of traffic crashes at the intersection of Gray Road and Range Road by J Brothers. And it is an absolute dead zone for us. When we're out there, we cannot talk to dispatch on our radios. So it's really maddening, not only for us, but also for dispatch, I'm sure, trying to talk with us when we can't talk back to them. I'm just going to play this and let it run for just maybe a couple minutes, and then we can discuss. So I think this is how this is going to work. I might have to adjust the volume, so bear with me. As you hear those are mic clicks. Those are us trying to talk to dispatch, and they cannot hear us. That again is our unit trying to talk back to dispatch with no luck. That's me trying to talk to dispatch. I'll stop there. It continues on, and it's just that bad. And as Councilor Kopp just motioned, we're famous in Cumberland for what we like to call the Statue of Liberty pose, because there's a lot of areas in town. If we're going to have any success in talking to dispatch, the officers have to take their radio out of the holder, hold it up over their head like the Statue of Liberty, and then they can talk on their microphone. And that extra little bit of elevation can sometimes help them reach dispatch. Now, I can tell you, as a first responder, having both of your hands full of a radio is not safe, it's not smart. Having your hands up over your head, especially if you're at a crash scene or if you're at a scene of a law enforcement operation where maybe somebody's going to get arrested or maybe it's not a safe scene, that's really not the way that we ought to be doing business, but it's what has evolved over time. I actually was going to take a picture and put it in here, but in the interest of brevity, I didn't. That was a call that was right across from the board barn, the old board barn off Route 100, if you're familiar with that. And we could not talk to dispatch. We had to basically get on the phone to relay the information to them that we needed to tell them. So what is the fix? According to our consultant, it is new radio equipment, which is VHF and microwave equipment, discontinuing the use of the FAA tower, and building what I'm calling a backbone of microwave connected towers across Cumberland. A 200-foot tower in the west yet to be built near the West Fire Station. Use of the existing Verizon tower at Valhalla. They are amenable to us putting our equipment up there, provided that we can have engineering study done to show that our equipment won't negatively impact the integrity of the tower. the new tower at Rangeway that you just took a vote for, again, thank you. And then modifying slightly the equipment that we have out on Shabig Island now. You might be curious what a couple of new towers in Cumberland would look like. And so Bill reached out to a contact that does GIS mapping, and they were able to do this model which would show you roughly, based on where the towers may be situated, how visible they would be from different property maps or property lots, property parcels in Cumberland. So the first circle is a 1 mile radius from where the tower would be located on the east, and then the second circle is a 3 mile radius. And these small blue colors are where you would be able to see the tower from the tower in the east. And then over here on the west, again, the areas that are colored in red are locations that you would be able to see a tower on the west side from those properties. And I'm not sure how that's going to look up on your screen, but if you can see right here, that is the existing tower on Rangeway. I took that picture today, actually, just before lunch, over on Drown Road. So these are your solar panels that you can see on Drown Road. I was standing in the parking lot of the Public Works. So to give you an idea of what the visual impact would be, there would be another small tower probably about here. The proposed layout of the new tower, just kind of for your information, would contain some public safety antennas here, the private cell antennas would be here, here, and then microwave dish, and then some more of our antennas here, and then room for future antenna arrays that the developer would put, and then other microwave dishes down here, just so you kind of get the idea that they've been very good in working with us, very comfortable and confident that we can accommodate our needs and their needs to make this workable for everyone. And again, working with Whitney, who's been a huge help to Chief Small and I, we took on both the police webpage and the fire webpage, so these are exactly the same, just depending on whose page you want to go to. The report that I did, kind of a summary of everything we've done up until now, linking all the reports, the microwave path survey, the consultant's study about why we need to have a new radio system, cost estimates, everything's in there that you can go and look at, so we don't have to take up unnecessary time tonight. But the estimated cost of the project is $1.7 million. That's a lot of money, and I don't ask you to consider that lightly. I realize that you're juggling a lot of priorities, but this to us is a top priority because, as I mentioned before, it's just simply a safety concern. And I think the fact that we are maybe on the cusp of addressing it and making it a lot better, I'll say like the 8th time since I've been here talking to you, would be the most amazing thing that we've done in my time as chief here. So I really hope that you give it some consideration. Dan and I are happy to answer any questions you might have, and we'll absolutely do our best to get you any information that you need to help make an informed decision.
I guess my question, and if it's in, because I forget, if when you presented to us, how much of that one, like, is it that you have to do everything at the same time because your equipment wouldn't be compatible, like, or is there any opportunity for phasing the spend?
That is a great question, and I can ask our consultant, but my belief is, just because of the nature of the fact that our equipment is at end of life and that they would be climbing towers and installing equipment, that having some new, some used, some, microwave and some not microwave, that it's probably got to be a one-time deal.
It could be staged over 2 fiscal years, though, pretty easily, and a lot of this money could be looked at through TIF funds as well.
Okay. Go ahead, Ron.
Chief, do you know what the life expectancy of the new apparatus would be? I mean, I know the old stuff is 30, 40 years old, I mean, so.
That is true, and it has well outlived its usefulness. I do have that information in a schedule because the consultant we've been working with has kind of provided us some numbers to use as rough guidelines for capital budgeting, because once this is done, in order to properly provide for replacement as pieces fail moving forward in the future, we ought to talk about capital budgeting. So I don't have that all in front of me, but it's something like, an antenna might be good for 10 years and a radio might be good for 8 years. And so we do have all that. I don't have it right at.
No,
the tip of
I'm
my-
just curious. I mean, and I know the stuff that we have now is so outdated. I mean, I've seen you guys at accident scenes, they get frustrated and they have to get out their cell phone to make conversation with dispatch. I mean, and the West End is especially is where I see it, so.
Absolutely. There are spots, and I asked Scott to be here in case you had questions about other spots in town, but there are locations, I think this is important to note, on the west and in the center and in the east where communication is problematic for us, but you're absolutely right. I'm thinking most recently because we've had a recent spate of crashes at Route 100 and Range, and then I had them pull that audio from a little bit
Right.
further up on Route 100. But there are spots all over town that just desperately need attention.
I think we're good on this
front.
item. Did you want to
You want me to roll on to the next one, Counselor?
go for it?
All right. And if that wasn't enough. So my second request, and again, provided written documentation to you, just some slides here to talk through, is for us to start, hopefully, the conversation of considering whether it's time to find the police department a new home in a standalone building, purpose-built for the operation. So, quick backstory, first 18 years of my career in my former department were spent in the basement of Town Hall. And about 3 years before I left to come to Cumberland, we built a new station. So I was really excited to be part of that process, the planning of it all, and it was really neat. Worked out very well. We got ourselves a nice new building. And then when I saw the advertisement for the Cumberland Chief's job, I thought, that seems like a beautiful town. That seems like it might be a great opportunity. I should drive down and check out the location. And what's, GPS location of the PD, and drove in and said, oh, basement of Town Hall, all right. I'm very familiar with how this works. So, but what I used to say when I was at my former employer about a new PD was, it has nothing to do with Rumsey, right? I work in an office. My office has a desk, it has a computer, it has a phone. I can do my job, and I can do my job fairly efficiently. But I think the consideration of a new purpose-built police department isn't for me at all. It is for the women and men that we ask to go out on the road, do the tough work that they do, have a place to come back to either process an arrest if they need to bring one back, run an intoxilizer test if they need to, write a report if they need to, have a nice locker room to change up and get ready for work and change out after work. So we'll talk a little bit about why that's important, but just know that when I make this request to you, and again, I realize that it's a substantial request, and I realize that you've got to go back and kind of gauge how important this is and how much of a priority it is to you after you've listened to everybody else's requests. I'm not asking for me. I'm asking for the folks that I ask to go out and do the tough work that they do. And I think they do a pretty good job. So the current station, built in 1998, originally housed both the PD and the rescue department. The original layout made sense based on the use of the facility and police operations at the time. I think a few of you have toured that space downstairs and know that it's kind of odd now the way it's configured, but it's because there were things there, moved out, other space was filled in, and doesn't make as much sense now as it used to. The size of CPD has changed over the past 24 years, and modern design and police operations have evolved, which I think require the consideration of a new purpose-built facility, which we can discuss. And just a couple of examples. So this is a picture of where we store our temporary evidence. So these temporary evidence lockers, we put the evidence in, lock them up. Our detective, who is also our evidence custodian, comes and takes them out, moves them around the corner into a evidence room. And to the left side of the picture there, you can see a refrigerator that has a lock on it that we use if we have to lock up biological sample, blood sample, urine before it goes to a lab for evaluation. This is a picture of a hallway on one side of Falmouth Police Department, and on the left side of that photo, you can see what is kind of the standard now for evidence handling, which is called pass-through evidence lockers. So an officer sees his evidence out on the road, comes back to the police department, packages it up, brings the evidence to one of these lockers, puts it in, closes the locker, and then nobody else has access to it anymore other than the evidence custodian who goes into the evidence room on the backside of that, pulls it out, is able to catalog it and put it onto the shelves. And it hardens up the chain of custody so that there are not potential arguments about, well, who had keys to those padlocks that were on that old gym locker that's in your basement. We have a meeting room, and it's not a bad size space, but it's pretty dated, and it's really tough the way it's situated for meetings with non-department personnel. We've tried to hold, we've held like a Shellfish Commission meeting there before when all the meeting spaces up here were being used, but it's in the rear end of a locked facility. It has to be locked because of federal laws about keeping our criminal justice information systems data safe. So when I bring somebody in, I've got to go out to the door and let every single person in. Theoretically, I need to escort them all to this room. If they leave the room, I've got to escort them out. There's no access to restrooms for anybody. Back in this part of the building, the only restrooms are in our locked locker room. So it's very tough for us to have any kind of a meeting down there where we would want to invite members of the public to come in, people from other police departments, anything like that. Sort of a modern idea of a training room, this is from the new Yarmouth building, is that you have a lobby, and off that lobby you have a training room so that you could invite people to come in that don't need to have access to the secured part of your station farther in. Some challenges with traffic flow downstairs. The location that the intoxilizer, where our fingerprint area is, and where our officers' work area is on the opposite end of this side of the building. So the garage bays are right below us, and officers, if they come in there bringing an arrestee or somebody that needs to take an intoxilizer test, or just to come in and do reports, if they park over here, walk down this long back hallway to get over to the other side of the station, they're walking past, if they have an arrestee, our detective's office, our locker rooms, potentially whatever might be going on with the Central Maine Conditioning Clinic or other uses that happen downstairs are crossing over in that back part of the building and shouldn't really be. And if those officers are over on the other side of the building and their cruisers are parked over here and they suddenly need to get out of the station to go to a high priority emergency call, they've got a long way to go, and it can slow down their response to a call. This is a picture on the left of our locker room, and these lockers are pretty jam-packed with all the gear that the officers have. I make them wear these crazy hats from time to time, and winter boots, and their duty belts, and winter uniforms, summer uniforms, jackets. And so there isn't appropriate room for them. On the right side is sort of what the standard is now in police locker rooms. These look like big NFL sort of lockers. Down the bottom, they have a big boot drawer that you can store all your boots in. This one, I think this little drawer that you see right here, don't quote me, but I think that is where you can lock a firearm for an extra level of security. I've seen that in some of these lockers. Some of these lockers have power run to them, so officers can charge their little flashlights that we carry, cell phones, and things of that nature. Built-in benches there for changing on. I asked Chief Kilbride to ship me over a couple pictures of the Falmouth PD. This is a picture of the outside of their station and a picture of their patrol division. And I think the end of the slide is, the reason I wanted to show these Falmouth pictures is down here on the lower right. You know, me asking you for a bunch of money to build a new police station because it would assist me in recruitment and retention may seem like a hard sell, but I will tell you that coming to work in a really nice facility that gives you pride of place and makes you feel good about where you are is important to people. And I can tell you that these agencies to the north and south of us that have new police facilities, they are hiring, and I can tell you that they would love to have our people. I can tell you that their troops try to recruit our troops. And so, so far, you know, we've resisted for the most part. But I think it is important to note that, you know, in our little neighborhood here, there's a different standard of the buildings between Yarmouth, Falmouth, and Cumberland. So going back over to the left side of the slide, operation of a police department out of a building and parking lot that serves a lot of other functions presents challenges. We're heading sometimes out of here to go to an emergency through a crowded parking lot. Of course, we need to drive with due regard, no question. We always need to be careful about what we're doing. But when we're intersecting with folks maybe that are coming out of the trails, walking their dog, or Little League, or whatever the case might be, it can just create a lot of crossover in the operation of the police department and these other uses that you don't usually see in other departments. I was going to have Scott bring the garage door opener so I could see when I said disruptive noise in the garage door, he could hit the button and let the door rumble. But I know you've heard it many times over the years. And then inside the building, I mentioned crossover of pedestrian traffic. So we do try to keep uses of the building separate so that if we're bringing somebody in that's under arrest or that's intoxicated and needs to take an intoxilizer test, that they don't have to come through either that long back hallway I showed you or our front lobby where there might be a civilian in there making a police report or talking to an officer about something that is kind of an emotional issue. So it would be nice to have a purpose-built facility that would allow us to do that. Moving PD would allow space to be allocated for other needs. In my former employer, what actually pushed us out of the basement to our own facility was that our city hall also sort of housed the opera house, and so they put on a bunch of plays, and they needed room for a new set design facility, and so that was what actually pushed us out of the basement. Get out of here so we can have a bigger set design facility. And I know that Bill alluded earlier to this town is growing, personnel are going to be growing, space needs for this building are certainly an issue, and that would allow for some other uses for space downstairs. That is it. I'm happy to ask any questions that you might have. I'm not under the illusion that you're going to take a vote at the end of this meeting to spend millions of dollars on a new police station. But if there is anything that you think we can do as you start to prioritize all these capital requests, whether it's formation of a committee to discuss, the space needs, or talking to an architect to see what a building might actually look like or what it might actually cost or anything like that, some small step that we could show the folks downstairs that do, I think, pretty good work and pretty hard work that we're thinking about it, I think that would be tremendous. I would appreciate it and happy to answer any questions you might have, or thank you for listening.
I like community policing, and I like local policing. I think that's very important for, particularly the schools and kids. And I think it's in a large degree. I think it's important that the officer on patrol is familiar with neighborhoods and where people live and who they are, and but that being said, I also recognize that most of the country operates in a much different fashion, and we talk about county fire, county police, and so, the budgetary constraints, where is policing going to go in the next 20 years? I know there's a pushback against expansion of county services, but, if you talk about delivery of services at a reduced cost or more bang for your buck, I know the conversations happened here over the years, why aren't we having one superintendent for, 10 communities? And so maybe you could give us your thoughts.
So I think that the concept of regionalization is great. I think it's very important. I think those are conversations we have had and should continue to have. I think at their base level, regionalization makes sense. You've probably all heard it and probably all said it. If we're delivering the same or better product at the same or less cost. And so if the root of your question, if I'm close, is does it make sense to spend millions of dollars building a new police station when we ought to spend time thinking about whether there's a different model? I think that could be part of the conversation, but I would think that the concept of regionalizing with whoever our dance partners might be is a process that, should there be willing dance partners, would be very expensive. And I would suspect that by the time it was all said and done, the cost of a facility might not be a really huge determining factor. I don't know if there was going to be a shared facility, where that might be. It's a pretty big question. I think the number one question is, who would our dance partners be? Is it going to be the county that's going to come in and take us over? I don't think so. Is it going to be Yarmouth or Falmouth that's going to come in and partner with us? Maybe, but they have brand new facilities and good sized departments. So I certainly get where you're going, and I'm not threatened by the notion of it at all. You know, I'm at a point in my career where if there was consolidation of various police agencies, number one, if I threw my hat in the ring to run them all, I would feel confident in being considered for that position. And if I wasn't, I will go find something else to do. So nothing threatening about it to me at all. But I don't know if that conversation is going to move along fast enough with the certainty of success that we shouldn't have this conversation too, because of the, you know, the ramifications that it's having on us now.
I'm just curious, how many arrests do you have to process a year on average?
That's a great question. Not many is the short answer. We bring in a lot more people that are, you know, maybe detained for the purposes of taking an intoxilizer test, a probation violation, or something of that nature. Although what scares me, and I think it concerns the folks downstairs, I was talking with Sergeant Ridge about it the other day, that with the issues that you're probably hearing about on the news at the jail, and how much more difficult it is to actually bring somebody that's under arrest to the jail. For most of the time that I've been here, if we arrested somebody that never even came here, they would get arrested out on the street, put in the back of a cruiser, taken down to the jail, and dropped off there.
Okay.
But I anticipate that the issues at the jail are not going away. And I anticipate that the use of a booking facility, which we don't actually even have here, where you could bring someone in, keep them somewhat secure while you took fingerprints, photographs, did an intoxilizer test if you needed to, maybe even called a bail commissioner to make arrangements to bail somebody out, that we're going to see that go up on the increase. So, two-part question. Pretty unusual that we actually bring somebody here under arrest, but I think will become more commonplace moving forward. So during COVID, when the jails were shut down, and then some of the issues that they've had because of staffing now, we have brought people that are here under arrest, brought them down here, given them an intoxilizer test, and then basically released them with a summons, which is not great, I don't think, for public safety, but it is the environment in which we find ourselves operating, unfortunately.
Could you share about the number of calls you do a year, Chief, and what the UCR is, the Uniform Crime Report, that we kind of all follow and measure ourselves against a little bit?
Sure, yeah, the short answer about the number of calls for service is about 9,000. The vast majority of those are property checks, traffic stops, citizen assist, things of that nature. We are one of the safest towns in Maine. We have one of the lowest crime rates. Therefore, we have, a pretty low rate of certainly physical and custody arrests, but even criminal summonses. And I think I'm going to come back and talk with you folks on December 12th or 14th. And so at that point, I will plan on bringing with me pretty brand newly published crime stats we'll be closing out 2022. So I think these are crime stats for 2021 that I'll be bringing for you. So I don't have the new ones yet, but I will be bringing them to you shortly, and we'll talk about what they mean.
I've always been impressed by the clearance rate.
Yes, it's traditionally been very high.
Yep.
Chief, this is just a really general question. How many officers and personnel do we currently have working in the building?
So we have 12 sworn officers, and then a full-time administrative assistant and a full-time animal control officer. So who's working at any one point in time is wonky because we're a 24-hour operation, certainly more during the day when I'm there and the detective's there and the admin assistant. We always have at least one person working 24 hours a day, sometimes two, and then it gets higher than that during the day, if that's helpful.
Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of times the state police will make an arrest out on the interstate in Cumberland for like an OUI, and they will bring them here for an intoxilizer test. Is that correct?
It certainly is.
As well as the sheriff's department in certain cases too. I mean, and I see this more than the rest of us because I'm the guy that usually goes out and tows them off. And to your point, there was an OUI accident out on the turnpike about 2 weeks ago. The young fellow was from Connecticut, was outrunning the police, went off the road, down into the woods 250 feet. He was arrested, put in the front seat of a cruiser, kicked the windows out of the cruiser, kicked the radio off the dash, kicked the radio out of the car, was arrested. The very next morning, this was at 6 o'clock at night, the very next morning, he called me from his home in Connecticut. He was out of jail and back in Connecticut, and wanted to know if he could come get his car. So this is what we're dealing with. I mean, and he was like a 2-1, I think is what his alcohol level was. I mean, it was pathetic. And I assumed that he was just getting out of jail in Portland. He says, no, I'm in Connecticut, I'm home. And he hadn't been, never was booked. I mean, did
Never went to jail.
thousands of dollars worth of damage to the cruiser. And that's what these guys are dealing with. I mean, so.
It's pretty amazing that you actually have more war stories than I do. from that. But yes, it is.
I see the worst.
It's unprecedented what we're going through. And I look at, I'm just looking at the job market, and I'm looking at what they're going through at the jail, and I don't think there's an easy answer for that. I don't think this is something that's going to suddenly, turn around. So I foresee the need to have a better facility where there may be much more frequent times where we bring folks here and we need to figure out what to do with them while we would never have a jail. We would never house anybody here, but bring them here for booking, like we did in my former agency. We brought people to the station, booked them, fingerprinted them, photographed them, called a bail commissioner, and many times bailed them from the station. They never actually went to the jail. And I think we're going to find that to be more common here as well.
I think we had, tell me if I'm wrong, didn't we have a cage at the old police station that's now the Historical Society?
Yeah, everybody had them.
Yeah. I remember taking a tour. It was impressive.
Just slack them in there. I guess I had a question, Chief. So the traffic is a really, I don't know, I never thought of it before, but like the fact that that's the entrance to the town forest, it's the food pantry, it's the way everyone loops around, that's very, very real. But also like a lot of the traffic patterns within the building, this is very eye-opening. Have we explored renovation before? I know that doesn't twice. And
No,
why?
no.
Oh,
2
million.
And
So it's half.
Mike basically put the kibosh to that almost immediately. He said, if we're going to pay 2 million, we might as well find our own building. Because why keep them here if the town's only going to grow? So I think that's what pushed us to a new station versus renovating the space down below. It seemed like a lot to put into a renovation.
And
Those were architect drawings.
Yep, okay.
Sorry to interrupt, boss. They did a good job in helping to lay the space out better down there, but they can't fix there's a number of things they can't fix, that a bunch of the buildings below grade, that if you're on the backside of this building, you never see natural light, that just the way that it's shaped and the fact that our garage bays are over on this side, you can't compress most of the functions, like the intoxilizer, the interview rooms, all these things that really should be near where the police park and bring somebody into the building. It can't all be moved down here. So they did a really good job and made it better had we gone that way. But it was $2 million that wasn't going to fix the interior circulation and the exterior circulation. And I'm very proud of this place. I love working here. This is a great town. I usually come in and do the drug take-backs that we do every 6 months. I do them myself because it's a cool opportunity to get to talk to folks in the community that I wouldn't otherwise see. But it's amazing how often people say, I wasn't really sure where to find you. And I suspect there's not that many towns that you could go to that people wouldn't know how to find their police department, which is a good thing. And it means we're a very safe community, and maybe folks haven't had a need to try to figure out where we are. But we're also like hidden away from the community where, I know it's funny times, but I'm proud of us and what we do, and I think that, a building that shows pride in the department and the community's sort of dedication to public safety wouldn't be a bad thing either, to have a little bit more visibility.
I hope your response to those people was, well, you break the law and we'll find you.
What's the square footage of your needs?
I think we're using 10,000 as a rough estimate. That's about what this building is, and that's roughly about what Falmouth PD is. So I think that's probably a fair starting point. But I think if we got down to brass tacks and we started looking at designing a standalone building, maybe we realize there's efficiencies that I haven't thought of, and that could change. I think bringing the professionals in, is an important thing to do. That's why I feel like we actually started to get some traction with this radio project when we were able to get a grant to get some money to start talking to an engineer to start making some of the unknowns knowns. And so we're using 10,000, but certainly I think the pros will let us know if that's about right.
And I just had one follow-up question on that. You talked about the number of officers and professionals that we have, as well as the square footage. Do you see in 5 years, 10 years, us adding, I mean, are we currently understaffed for where we need to be? Where is that number in terms of our population growth in your mind? And you may not have it off the top of your head, but
I
just
don't
curious
have
to
the
get your
exact
thoughts.
number, but I do have the numbers downstairs because there's a couple of the things we'll talk about when I come back to see you in December. But I think we're understaffed. You know, I think to have a valid 24-hour operation where you have to give people time off, they get to take vacation, they get sick, they have babies. It becomes very hard just with a department of 12 to run a 24-hour operation. And we're down one person right now working on hiring somebody to get back up to full staff. You go down one person and it severely impacts the operation. People have to start working overtime to fill shifts. They get tired, they get burnt out. And so, you know, I anticipate in the next few years that our number of school resource officers is probably going to grow. And I would anticipate, you know, in my perfect world, we would be a couple of more patrol officers in size to help better staff the overnight part of our operation. So my perfect world, but population is growing. I think when you look at the number of officers per 1,000 when compared to those around us, we're a little bit light. And I'll bring those to you next time.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Did you have something?
Yeah, I was just going to echo Allison in it being incredibly eye-opening. But the first time, Chief, I ever met or went down to the fire station to meet with you, if you recall, we were walking down that hallway, and there was a table in the middle that was housing all of your Alice equipment. So, you know, like lots of balls and all sorts of stuff. And so it seems as though, you know, just storage in general. I mean, obviously the evidence being kind of high priority, but it's such a narrow little space for you guys. And knock on wood, we're in an incredibly safe community. But if the need were ever to really expand and you needed to get out of there really quickly, I can imagine. Yeah.
That's very true. And, you know, I do remind the folks downstairs, you know, the problems we have are problems that police departments all over the country would like Kill to have. So I do have I think the right perspective. But all that being said, very valid point, we are pinched.
Thank you very
very
much,
much.
Chief. Item 22-143, to hear a report from our fire chief, Chief Small, regarding fire department capital improvement plans.
So you guys have a packet in front of you. Just a couple quick pieces of the department. As you know, back in 18, yelling at me.
Nobody can hear you at home.
That was by design. In 2018, when you guys authorized doing Central Station, we were able to bring a lot of things into that facility, which is accommodating for the depth of the organization. And it's kind of like what Chip was saying, it's going to continue to grow, and I don't want the West End to not have the same coverage that we do in the center of town. We do have very strong mutual aid packs, Yarmouth and Falmouth, even North Yarmouth come automatically. So we have that, but it's still the depth. I had 1 million people here tonight, but I would love to think that a lot of them come regularly and that just people's lives get in the way, right? So Central, we're in really good shape. There's growth potential at the station. Our call volume is going to be about 1,200 this year, and the average of the previous 3 years is just under 1,000. So we are growing. The crews just did 5 calls today. So I'll cut to the chase with this about moving to the West End station. The term that I used was it was built, if you can see, I'll go backwards here.
87.
So if you can see just this basic section, if you can follow, that section there was the old fire station. That was built in 1970, and it was, you had room for 2 trucks to back in. If they had a training, they had to pull the trucks out of the building and then do the training on the inside. Ken Wagner was the chief in the 80s, and he made the decision with some research that we needed to do more in the West End. But budgets, were tight, and we got what we could out of it, and we were excited to have that. So the 3 bays were added. We've renovated it a few times. There's actually a couple bedrooms that we keep our college students in. We did take those students out during COVID just to have them into one place. There's 4 bedrooms at Central. The reason I'm saying the inside stuff is right now, we're not looking to do anything on the inside of this building. It's how the building looks. That's where I want us to look. As we know, the Route 100 corridor you guys have spent a ton of time on is looking so much better than it ever once did. Vinyl siding, the sign shop building, their office, whatever it is a masonry building. They all look pretty nice. But again, we have a metal building that doesn't really fit the neighborhood. I don't know what the depth of that corridor is off of Route 100, if you will. Certainly this time of year, the leaves have dropped. You can see that building more readily than what it was, what it is when the leaves are there. So cutting to the chase, and the extra couple slides that I'll identify better are, again, it's just the visible aspects of that. Putting siding, vinyl siding even, around the building. Signage, the signs in the front of the building were built at the DOT sign shop. I went through the Route 100 design guidebook and was finding things out of that I feel are appropriate there. So in looking at the front of the building, without having 1,000 pictures here, you really get, again, a good visual of what the building is like. We were able to, a few years ago, you can see the guardrail here, we actually had that on the front of the building, so we took that out to put a little garden there. The problem is, now that there's a bedroom in this area, without the curbing there, the front door's not defined that well, and that's where snow gets pushed. So now, if anybody had to get out of the building, we are the ones that enforce, 2 means of egress, and yet we can't do it ourselves, let alone ice coming off that roof line. I already said the signage, that's no different than you'd see on I-95, telling you to slow down. That same sign material is the big piece. Biggest part of the money is the siding on the building. To go all the way around is where it's metal building, and trying to do just the basics of research. You can't just put, say, vinyl siding right over it. You're going to have to put some type of surface over that, and then the vinyl on top of that, if that, in fact, was the choice to be had. The far side of the building, on the Route 100 side, we just removed some trees from that side. There's an emergency exit out of that side, and yet there's nothing there. There's a public water fountain that's there, that there's no good access to that area. So there's a paving piece in here as well. Part of the Route 100 design guidebook talks about breaking up the wall surfaces, so it isn't just this, stark looking piece. So having said that, I'm not an IT super guy, so this was just picking shapes and sizes, but the side entrance that I want to put in, we've been talking about for a year or so. We just installed some lockers on the inside. To me, a big safety thing, and we changed it with the design at Central Station, was before the door, if I can go back. How we doing, Chip? So this door right here, when you go into the building, you have to go in front of the trucks to get into the building, either the side or go over to one side. If somebody's, it's call company, there's no full-time staffing here right now, so when the call company's going into the building, person in a truck that's pulling out of the station may not see them. And this has been a risk that we've had, some near misses in the past. So in conjunction with trying to break up the look of this side of the building, putting a door on this side, and we saw Gerald Cross early, he and I have met with us and talked about it. You could go in behind the trucks into the building, everybody's gear is right there. It's so much safer and quicker, for that matter. The windows, we've lived without windows since 1987. We probably would continue to live without them, but again, trying to go with that Route 100 guide of let's break down that whole facade of that portion of the building. I put those in there. Again, you can see to the left what the picture looks like. It's a metal, just a metal box that sits there on the ground. As we're doing this stuff, I feel that solar panels, I think that's got an exposure that would be very good to have. And all these things are different pieces that wouldn't have to happen all at once. And all the prices that are in your packets are guesstimates, because I don't know how to build out the wall surfaces or solar panels. There's just a lot of different pieces to move. So they are clearly estimates, approximates on talking to a few contractors that didn't have time to come out and spend a lot of time with us. The hose tower we no longer use, so we could get rid of that, just to take that look out of it. If it was a clock tower in the front, then sure, we'd keep it, but that's not what it was for. So that would come off when the solar panels, if they were to go on. The other things, and these are a lot easier, but you see the generator to the back of the building, the Route 100 guidelines talk about keeping things enclosed. We could do that. I could go to Mainline Fence tomorrow and get some fencing. Just want to make sure we put something that has some aesthetics to it, that isn't just this box behind the building. The other thing, because there is a lot of parking up there, and the hybrids vehicles, I don't know that we have any charging stations up there, but that could be an opportunity. Not saying that's the direction the town wants to go in, I'm not sure, but it is a location that could be there if need be. This is just the last slide that I took out of your presentation on the roundabout. You can see how we want that Route 100 corridor to look. And not that you can see the station in the slide here rather, but I think it's an important value where so many people are using the ball fields that are in that area, that we really need to make this look a lot better. Before, it just did not have, the community center wasn't built up the way it is now. The ball fields aren't the way they are now. We're excited about maybe having a statue in the middle of the roundabout. We want this area to look nice, and I feel that the station should be a part of that. So again, in your packets, it kind of shows the different points that we have. Do not hold us on the pricing. I didn't even dare to get a yes on. The solar panels, whether it's a one-done project or pieces, we're very much interested in. With all the other things going on, this may very well be something that's 5+ years down the road to fund other things that are there. But we just wanted to put that as a placeholder of it might be something to be considering going forward. And I'm happy to take any questions. This one's a pretty easy one.
I will just comment, I really appreciate the amount of kind of creativity, I will say, and kind of thoughtfulness and the ideas that you're bringing forward, kind of understanding some broader vision for the town and that area, even just like the solar panels and the charging stations. I don't think we have any, they're all in center of Cumberland, and so I will just say kudos to you and kind of understanding the immediate need and what you're trying to accomplish for the building and for the fire station, but kind of bringing in and understanding kind of the broader goals that we have for the community. So I just thank you for that. Any questions for Chief Small? I don't, thank you very much.
Thanks, Daniel.
Again, thank you both for kicking us off with no small dollars, but really thoughtful asks for both your departments. So thank you. You've set the bar high for those that follow. That concludes legislation and policy, so I'll start with new business. Mr. Counselor Eads? Shirley?
So last week I had the privilege of going to the Friends of the Library meeting. I invited myself and they were very welcoming. I took leftover Halloween candy, so that might have helped. They are an amazing group, and I just wanted, I am the liaison to the Library Advisory Committee, but this is a different group of entirely made up of volunteers, and they raise literally thousands of dollars a year and pay for most of the programs that happen at the library. They had a book sale this year that was their best ever. Granted, they hadn't had one in a couple years because of COVID. But I just wanted to remind you that there are still hundreds of volunteers out there that aren't always volunteers we see here at Town Hall. It was a great meeting. And as part of that, it reminded me, if you're not on the library weekly post or email list, you should get on it. Even if you're not a reader, you should get on it to see what's going on at the library for other programs, because there are some amazing things happening at the library. And that brings me to the holiday gift giving season, and I wanted to remind you that there are lots of opportunities to keep your dollars in Cumberland. You might donate money to the Friends, the Cumberland Historical Society, the Firefighters for Kids. Their pancake breakfast is the first weekend in December. The food pantry can always use your donations of cash and food. The Cumberland and Sheboygan Island Land Trust, you might give a gift membership to someone in your family. The Lions Club is always, you're selling, well, I bet pies are closed because they're being delivered this week, but I bet you could still get your citrus. And then most of the churches, West Cumberland and the high school are all having craft fairs this coming Saturday. So lots of opportunities to spend your money in Cumberland. I'd like to tell people that the Rail Trail public hearing for anyone in the Portland to Auburn region is going to be December 5th from 6 to 8 at our Performing Arts Center. I attended their last meeting. They have another meeting coming up tomorrow, 1 o'clock, in this very room. There's been a lot of talking in circles, a lot of debating without really debating. You know, each side, the rail people are presenting information and the bike trail people are presenting information, and they're not really debating the merits of each, but you can see them all sort of staging their desires. A lot of technical information, some numbers shared, but not real updated numbers. I share Bill's frustration with this group, but I encourage people to come out to the public hearing in December. There's a recreation and a library advisory meeting this week, an ordinance meeting next week. Winter sports started today for our athletes, winter athletes. Good luck, and I'll close by saying how grateful I am in the week before Thanksgiving to live in Cumberland and work with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
You would, just one thing I'd like to recognize, Barbara Berkovich, who was a resident for over 50 years here in the town of Cumberland, passed away recently, a resident of Wynn Road, 3 daughters, and condolences to the family.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just very briefly, we have a housing task force meeting on Wednesday night this week. And then I wanted to give folks just a quick update, just in case you're interested, on the Legislative Policy Committee meeting that we had on Thursday of last week. It's our second meeting that we have. Like I mentioned, the first meeting was really just spitballing ideas around, this is kind of whittled down based on online polling as to what folks feel are the most pressing issues. So they've kind of whittled these down into a top 10. Just very briefly, the number one on the list, I think it was a 98% in order of support in doing something with this was what our state senator and rep spoke about, which is senior property tax stabilization, LD 290. They're proposing potential legislation, MMA, moving forward on various options to tweak, modify, maybe improve that legislation. There were 3 issues dealing with general assistance, clarifying what it meant to be the municipality of responsibility in the GA statutes. There's also a working group at MMA working on general assistance, and one of the big issues they're focused on is to increase the reimbursement from 70% to 90% to the municipalities. So we'll see how that moves. There was one, number 4 on the list was broadband cable to streamline the process of broadband attachment to utility poles that are sitting in public ways. Number 5 on the list was interesting, requiring the state to potentially share a percentage of state adult use cannabis-related sales and excise tax revenues with the communities where that revenue was generated. Here in Cumberland, I've clarified with them, it does not apply, obviously, because we don't have any adult use sales stores. There was a proposal on senior property tax exemption application at the state level, just have one place, one-stop shop that you could go and apply for all of your exemptions at one time. And then the last 3 really related to public safety, so I'm glad we have the chiefs here today. One was to require the state to offer day and regional training and certification for law enforcement officers. Another was to require the state to implement and fund training programs for EMS services. And then finally, Mr. Manager, you and I talked about this, and I don't know if this is something that's current, but to require the prorated reimbursement of training costs whenever a full-time trained dispatcher, firefighter, or emergency medical service provider is subsequently hired by another government entity within 5 years of receiving training or accreditation. Sounds like there's something current on the books.
For police.
For police, okay, so it seems like this might broaden that slightly, and so there was, obviously, this is every municipality, every Senate district in the state focusing on these various issues. Some are specific to Cumberland, some might not affect us at all, so I'll just keep everybody updated there. And that's it.
Thank you. Ron?
Like $20 for the 4-H food pantry, Mr. Stiles. And Mike, I really want to commend you for setting up this Zoom meeting with Holly Smith. I mean, Holly and I graduated in 1980. When she took this job a year ago, I can't imagine that she ever even dreamed that she would see the devastation that she's seen down there now, and to have to go to work. I mean, I'm just trying to picture the 7 of us sitting here dealing with that devastation. I mean, you know, your neighbor's house is completely gone. You know, you can't go get groceries. You can't go to the police station. I mean, and to see her upbeat like she was is really remarkable. So I commend you, Mike, for setting that up. Good job. Just one thing, Thanksgiving is next week. Bill, is there anything that the food pantry is in desperate need of for donations?
We're finalizing the list. As always, Cumberland residents have stepped up amazingly and just about filled all the lists that we had online, and we appreciate that. We'll be making holiday baskets for about 80 families this year. So the list is growing, the needs are growing, but as always, this community has always stepped up. So thank you for everybody's help.
That's all we have.
Thank you. Tig?
LCC met on November 2nd. There is some amazing, I'm sorry. Better. Okay. LCC met on November 2nd. There is some really phenomenal work going on, kind of ad hoc to manage the invasives. The Trails Subcommittee, in partnership with CCLT and the Rec Department, are doing some really great kind of reimagining of the kiosks in terms of layout and signage. And Denny Gallaudet and the Sustainability Committee reported on the green ammonia technology, which I will not even attempt to explain to you, but has some really, really compelling solutions for decarbonization. And Denny also estimated that 68% of Cumberland's CO2 emissions are balanced by annual sequestration from our forested and agricultural lands, which is really, really great news and very kind of on par with those goals for the state for 2050, which we should surpass as a state even earlier than anticipated. And we are also reassessing the composting piloting project, hopefully less flies in diapers in the composting moving forward. You would not believe the pictures. They are horrifying. And there's a Coastal Water Commission meeting on Wednesday. That's it.
From my end, I just wanted to say a big thank you. We received a donation from the Stiles and Hanson families, who for 58 years have been holding a family golf tournament and family dinner. And as part of that, they have a 50-50 raffle where the proceeds do go to Valhalla's junior golf program. And so those families presented us with a $240 check to go towards those programs. So thank you to those families for that. Just wanted to say, again, the Chiefs have kicked us off with the CIP presentations. At our next meeting, we will have Public Works, Valhalla, and our Rec Department. So we'll kind of keep going through those. So please tune in. And I think that is it on my end. Oh, what would you like to add, sir?
I just want to thank the people in Cumberland who turned out for this last election. Historic turnout, 83.4%. I would personally like to thank our outgoing town clerk, who is retiring at the end of this year, Tammy O'Donnell. You talk about a positive energy force and a person that kept everybody excited about the day, as challenging as it was, and as challenging as it is to process a number of ballots. She was so excited about the turnout, and she was so excited about how energized the public was of being there. Everybody was in great spirits, and Tammy is going to be difficult to replace, and she is somebody I'm going to miss tremendously. She's just a person of such high character and such a great example for us all as public servants, and I will miss her greatly. We also had a meeting last week and interviews for our roundabout, phase 1 of the roundabout project. Thank you for the counselors who could make it that evening. Much appreciated. Goral Palmer was selected to take us through that first step. That'll take us about 8 to 10 months, and DOT and us are funding that first step of the project, 50-50. They were here at the meeting as well. That proposal will be before you on the 28th as well to authorize that contract. And we'll also be meeting this Thursday night for recommendation to the school board on the MSAD solar farm. That proposal is scheduled to, when located and up and running, to save us almost $500,000 in electrical costs every year. So that is a huge project. And finally, I'd like to thank Bert Kendall and the AMVETS Association. Every year on Veterans Day, they raise money for the food pantry here in Yarmouth, and this year they gave us a check for over $600 for the food pantry. So, and Patty Dunn at Rachel's last week during Thursday night, she raised $77 by just making everybody give us money. So Patty threatened them all before they could leave. So Patty, thank you so much. And that was very welcome when I went to breakfast there on Sunday. She was there and she said, here, this came from Thursday. So she's a big supporter and she always has been. So again, a great community.
Oh, go ahead, Ron.
Just one comment. I want everybody to look at our counselor to my right. She's got her coat zipped up under her chin, and she's absolutely froze over here. Is there anything we can do about this heat system?
Well, it was about
When I
90,
came in
it
here,
was
it was
about 90
100.
degrees when I came in here. so-
I mean,
100 degrees.
Chief, when you build a new PD, don't hire the same engineer that did this one.
Meanwhile, Ron, I'm like inching closer and closer to you for
I
body
was
heat.
gonna give her my coat, which is sitting behind me.
Sorry, I'm recovering from COVID and I'm just a little chillier than normal.
I'm going to put a lock on the thermostat very soon.
Well, in the spirit of gratefulness, I will just say I wish all of you a very happy Thanksgiving, and to our residents and all of our town staff who have in very recent times really stepped up to give, to support, to make their voices heard in a respectful and kind of just in the spirit of community and kind of wanting to move forward and being together. So again, thank you, and I wish everyone a very happy Thanksgiving. So I'll take a motion for adjournment.
No, not yet.
Oh, sorry, just, we have to go to executive session.
to executive
Move to executive session, please. Oh, do we,
You
we
need to
don't have
say
our
all that.
motion. Can I have a motion?
I
Yes.
move to move us into executive session.
Pursuant to.
Excuse me, pursuant to Title 36 MRSA, Section 841-2.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor? Thank you.
Ronnie, we're going to have emergency blankets here pretty soon.
My
Honest to God,
contacts
it's
are like
almost